Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. More ministers took the stand today at the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. We have an update from our political reporter, Brian Lilly. An Alberta Conservative MP spoke out against amendments the Liberals want to make to the firearms bill, which would include adding hunting rifles. And tragedy in Indonesia as a 5.6 magnitude earthquake leaves more than 270 people dead.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says the economic threat to Canada escalated exponentially when Freedom Convoy protesters blocked border crossings last winter. Freeland testified at the public inquiry investigating the government's use of the Emergencies Act. She says Canada was being hurt by the thousands of protesters who descended on Ottawa in late January. But she says the threat reached new levels when protesters blocked cross-border traffic on the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Ontario. Political reporter Brian Lilly has been following the public inquiry quite closely. He joins us now once again from Toronto. Brian, what was your impression from the testimonies of some of the ministers, including Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland and Justice Minister David Lametti?
I'll get to Lametti in a moment. I'll say off the top, though, I found him dismissive of the entire inquiry process at times, in keeping with some of the other Liberal ministers. But on Thursday morning, Chrystia Freeland showed up, and she's very different in her approach to things. I can find her condescending at times. She speaks to adults as if they're children at story time when she's in Parliament. But during her testimony, she came across as empathetic, sympathetic. At times, she told a lot of stories. But her case was mainly that the reason for invoking the Emergencies Act and the reason the government had to do something was for the economic damage being done to Canada. And that can be a compelling case for a lot of Canadians, because if you're someone whose job was on the line, let's say you owned a factory or you worked at a factory that was going to be shut down, then that would be a compelling case. Problem is, it's not a justification found in law. But as we learned from David Lametti on Wednesday, they don't care what the law says. They've got a broader, wider definition and reason for invoking the act. And when asked, what, will you show it to us? They said, no, solicitor-client privilege. They're not telling the inquiry on what legal basis they invoked the act.
Testimonies wrap up on Friday with the Prime Minister taking the stand. That should be interesting. How do you think that will go down once Justin Trudeau offers up his testimony?
I think he will try and charm people. I don't expect a lot of concrete answers out of him. We've had some concrete answers out of officials, out of the RCMP, out of CSIS. And really what we've learned over the last week is that the government invoked the act not based on what was in the legislation, but by their own definition, their own legal reasoning, and you're not entitled to know about it. I think that flies in the face of the act, but I think you'll see the Prime Minister come out and talk about that and defend it. He'll put on his best charm offensive, and that's what he's there for from the government point of view. Then it's up to Justice Rouleau to take it all in, for the lawyers to make their final written arguments, and for him to issue his report in February.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was Brian Lilly, political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist, joining us from Toronto. Conservative MPs discussed the proposed Liberal amendment to the firearms bill they say would prohibit hundreds of models of hunting rifles, including shotguns. Alberta MP Glenn Mott says the amendment is just strange.
It appears as if don't know why, other than it's, I would think that based on what the NDP and what the Bloc and what the Conservatives are looking at for some of these bills, as the witnesses we've heard, much of what was going to be in that bill on red flag laws and some of the airsoft industry, a lot of those things look like they could be stripped from the bill because they have no issue in public safety. They have no impact on public safety. They don't make things any safer. And we heard that from witnesses. And so with that in mind, it looks as if, the Liberals were going to be embarrassed and decided to ban a whole plethora of firearms and prohibit their possession.
Even though the Liberal NDP coalition is supposed to keep the Trudeau government in power until the year 2025, there's a little bit of buzz in Parliament Hill that we could see an early spring election. That's according to Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner. She shared the details on her Facebook page Thursday afternoon.
So what the Liberals did was they released something called their nomination rules for incumbent MPs. Those are people who are already Liberal MPs. Now, I wrote a long article about this, about why this potentially could mean a spring election, but it also probably means some really interesting things for the Liberal Party of Canada, including some potential problems that Justin Trudeau might be having about in their caucus. Now, I know Facebook and other social media platforms, they've been messing around with algorithms. Sometimes you can see videos like this, sometimes you can't. So I just encourage you to read this article on my Substack. The link to this article, including all the reasons why there potentially could be a spring election, but also some of the reasons in the Liberal caucus, are in the link to this article in this video. So number one, read this article. Number two, share it and share this video.
Well, it was a beautiful spring-like day here in Lethbridge. You know, it's hard to believe that the first official day of winter is just over 3 weeks away now. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, a lot of warmth is thanks to those strong Chinook winds?
Yeah, and you know how those wind gusts got up to 70 kilometers per hour today. I was worried that my trash can was going to blow down the street because it was garbage day and I didn't have time to bring it in. So it could be in the next town over or my neighbor's yard. So if you're my neighbor and you have an extra trash can in your yard, it's probably mine. And I am sorry. We can expect those winds again tomorrow, though, up to 70 kilometers per hour. But yes, those Chinook winds bringing the warm temperatures, high of 10 today, 12 tomorrow. What is the weekend going to look like? Well, I'll be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. An annual event to bring to light the issue of domestic violence took place on the Blood Reserve on Thursday morning. Over a dozen participants, including first responders, strapped on a pair of high heels and walked to raise awareness. As Angela Stewart reports now, officials say domestic violence cases are on the rise, so it's really important to hold events just like this one.
It was a wobbly strut Thursday morning in standoff for these first responders and participants. Sporting a pair of black leather and cheetah print pumps, the group took part in the Kainai Women's Wellness Lodge Walk in Her Shoes event.
It was challenging. It was tough. And it was just a short distance that I had to walk just down to the VTA and back.
The annual event, now in its 9th year, honors victims who have fled from domestic violence while also raising awareness of the issue.
We all know when women flee and children, sometimes they have no shoes, sometimes they have high heels, we're walking in them. And so this gives a chance for the men to feel how it feels to walk in a woman's shoes when they're fleeing in the cold.
I went through that. I went through domestic violence.
Florence Scout, an elder on the Blood Tribe, recalls many times having to flee from a domestic relationship and hopes events like this will help spread the word.
I have respect for the woman and themselves and their family, their kids. Domestic violence has been around for years and years, especially among our people.
Lorraine Healy, a supervisor at the women's shelter in Moses Lake, says the issue of domestic abuse is well known within the community, and many of the people they serve are returning clients.
We hear their stories. Their stories are from being in this abusive relationship for many years. We've had a lot of clients that have been there before.
This is something that we deal quite a bit with, and our officers. So it's definitely a good initiative to have.
Chief Body says they want the community to know resources are out there for anyone who might need them. The group, although may have lost their footing at times, hopes the event was just another step in the right direction for such an important cause. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
You know, domestic violence impacts so many families across the province. It's also Family Violence Prevention Month here in Alberta. Maria Fitzpatrick, the former Lethbridge East MLA, has shared her own story of domestic abuse. BCN's Micah Quinn chatted with Fitzpatrick about how she had a close brush with death at the hands of her ex-husband.
The reason I want to do this is because I think the silence around domestic violence has continued.
Maria Fitzpatrick has been through hell and back and lived to tell the tale. She presented at SACPA on Thursday afternoon and told her story of 9 years of abuse that she suffered from her ex-husband, including a terrifying time where he put a gun to the back of her head. She also talked about another particularly scary incident while she was with her ex-husband.
My babysitter and her sister-in-law, myself and my ex-husband had gone out to the local pub to play some pool. On the way back home, he had reached back, was touching the leg of one of the other women. I saw him do it, and I never said anything because I didn't want him to fight with me. Even though I said nothing, he came around and he started slapping me. And he slapped me until my eyes were swollen shut, my face was swollen.
Fitzpatrick, along with her children, were eventually able to escape the abuse. She provided numbers from a 2019 Stats Canada report regarding domestic violence incidents for victims ranging in age from 15 to 89 years old.
In 100,000 people, there were about 536 cases. Our numbers here in Lethbridge were 586, and 1,825 were turned away from the shelter.
The 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign begins on Friday. Individuals and organizations from around the world use the movement to call for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Many people would argue that we live in a very dark world. It's important now more than ever to be a bright, shining light for God in this dark world. That's according to Bree Stensrud. She's the director of Women of Welcome. Stensrud also co-authored a book called The Biggest, Best Light. She says it's vital to push yourself outside of your comfort zone to be able to reach people for Christ.
Our families are going to really have to take a hard look at, are we facing the vulnerable? Are we creating time? Are we creating space to be inconvenienced? I mean, we only really love as well as our willingness to be inconvenienced. So is your family ever inconvenienced for the sake of others? And if so, I think that looks like the heart of Christ. I think that looks like Jesus's life, being inconvenienced to love on and appreciate other people that might not just be in your normal circle of life.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Bree Stensrud from Women of Welcome and myself coming up in the second half of our program. Toys are set to be tossed here in southwestern Alberta on Friday evening for a very good cause. Prior to the Coaldale Night of Lights Parade, the first ever Coaldale Emergency Services toy toss will be put on by emergency services personnel. Officials are encouraging parade watchers to toss a toy at volunteers, which will then be distributed out to kids in our community who are most in need.
Our last few years have been disrupted quite a bit, as you well know, and we're trying to re-engage with the community and really get back out and address some of the needs that we've seen with increasing calls and working with families in the community, and just trying to make sure that if we can make the season joyful for everyone, it's going to help with all of those things.
Donations for the Coaldale Food Bank will also be accepted during the evening's festivities. You know, one of the great features so many of us appreciate up by Lethbridge's parks and natural areas are the ponds and wetlands. They serve an important purpose in and around farmers' fields. Kirby England teaches environmental studies at Lethbridge College. He's also a local plant and wetlands expert. England says these wetlands are as important to the ecosystem as an organ is to the human body.
The sort of common expression is the wetlands are the kidneys of the ecosystem. They're doing all of this water filtration, removal of pollutants, removal of nitrogen and phosphorus, things that are pretty common around many a farmer's field. And so those wetlands are basically improving the water quality. They're improving the conditions for soil microbial activity for a variety of organisms. And so just as they're important to have within the city, they're really important to maintain out there on the land.
Make sure you catch the full interview with BCN's Jeanette Roche and Lethbridge College's Kirby England coming up after business news. The spectators lined the streets of New York as high-flying balloons ushered in the holiday season at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. The annual tradition brings inflatables and floats down more than 40 blocks from Central Park to Herald Square. The tradition has continued for the past 96 years. U.S. President Joe Biden was out delivering pumpkin pies to the Nantucket firefighters for Thanksgiving on Thursday. Biden also talked about the recent mass shootings which took place in the United States that has claimed more than 10 lives.
The idea we still allow semi-automatic weapons to be purchased is sick. It's just sick. It has no social redeeming value. Zero, none. Not a single solitary rationale for it except profit for the gun manufacturer.
Can you do anything about gun laws during the lame duck, sir?
I'm going to try.
What will you try and do?
I'm going to try to get rid of assault weapons.
During the lame duck?
I'm going to do it whenever I got to make that assessment as I get in and start counting the votes.
Meanwhile, the FBI searched the home of the suspect in the Virginia Walmart shooting that left 6 people dead.
Last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, it was big trucks, armored trucks, undercover cars all over the street. Just blocked the whole street off. It's a sad thing to know that literally it's right in your backyard. He seemed a little weird. Like I said, he got mad. The kids' bus stop for all schools out this neighborhood is right in front of his door. He would get mad. The kids were standing in front of his door sometimes, but they were blocking his driveway. I guess he didn't like it. So just never thought nothing like this. You know what I mean?
A 5.6 magnitude earthquake left more than 270 people dead and hundreds injured as buildings crumbled and terrified residents ran for their lives on Indonesia's main island of Java. There are reports that many of the casualties were children.
Mengerikan sekali. Bahkan sekarang juga kealami tsunami seperti gini. Sampaikan kehilangan saudara. Bahkan saudara rumah juga. Rumah pribadi juga ambruk.
Some more sad news today, but this time in the hockey world. The Toronto Maple Leafs announced that Hockey Hall of Fame defenseman Borje Salming has died at the age of 71. Salming had been battling ALS. He was one of the first European-trained players to make an impact in the NHL and was credited with paving the way for many future European stars. Salming signed with Toronto as a free agent back in 1973 and played for the Leafs for 16 seasons before finishing his career with the Detroit Red Wings. A first-team All-Star, he appeared in 1,148 career NHL games, posting 150 goals and 787 points. Now here's something you don't see every day. Ostriches on the loose in the town of Tabor, which is located about 50 kilometers northeast of Lethbridge. RCMP were trying to round up around 20 ostriches which escaped from a nearby farm. Sadly, one of the birds was hit and killed on the roadway. Fortunately, no people were injured. Police say all but 2 of the ostriches have since been recaptured. The hunt continues. By the way, thanks to Fireman 2017 for supplying the footage. Hopefully strong Chinook winds we experienced today will blow the remaining ostriches back to the owner's farm. And those brisk winds also brought us some warmer temperatures here in southwestern Alberta. The plus-degree temps, however, may not be sticking around much longer. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. When Lethbridge receives the strong Chinook winds, it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario. On one hand, you get the nice warm temperatures, but on the other hand, your barbecue can end up in your neighbor's backyard. Jeanette Roche is in now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, perhaps we should enjoy the warm, windy conditions while we can, since the cold and snow may be here again very soon?
Yes, it sure will be, Hal, unfortunately. And you mentioned barbecues. Yeah, barbecues, trash can. Any of it can end up in your neighbor's yard with these crazy 70-kilometer-per-hour winds that we're having. But oh, those Chinooks, they sure do bring the warm weather. It was a high of 10 today, high of 12 tomorrow. We can expect those high winds tomorrow as well. Into Saturday, looking at a high of 7 degrees, 3 expected on Sunday with a chance of flurries. And then starting Monday, we're going to be going back down into the deep freeze, minus 11 for an expected high, minus 14 on Tuesday, and down to minus 16 on Wednesday. That is like full-blown winter as far as I'm concerned, and we're going to be seeing some flurries as well on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, average high for this time of year, 2 degrees. Average low, minus 9. What's happening next week? I don't know. It's going into the minus teens for sure. 17, that was our high temperature on this day back in 1939, and it was minus 28 back in 1996. Sun rose this morning at 7:57. Sun set this evening at 4:39. p.m. That's actually more afternoon than evening, I would say. Okay, on the west coast tomorrow, looking at a little bit of winds in the Juan de Fuca Straits near Victoria, high of 9 degrees. Periods of rain ending in the morning. Periods of showers also ending in the morning in Vancouver, high of 9 degrees there. Mainly sunny skies in Edmonton tomorrow. 5 is the expected high, and an expected high of 8 degrees tomorrow in Calgary with mainly sunny skies. As we look to the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon seeing a high of 5 degrees, 10 in Regina with clearing skies, 3 degrees the high for Winnipeg under sunny skies as well. So get out your sunglasses if you're in those part of the prairies tomorrow. It's going to be pretty nice. Okay. Precipitation expected tomorrow in central Canada, 7 degrees the high. Periods of rain expected to end in the morning for both Toronto and Ottawa. And then we're looking at showers and flurries. Montreal could see a risk of freezing rain along with that 7-degree high. 6 degrees the high in Fredericton, looking at some showers. 8 the high in Halifax tomorrow. Rainfall expected there, about up to 5 millimeters. Charlottetown expecting a high of 5 degrees, some showers and some rainfall mixed with snow tomorrow. Could see a blowing snow advisory in effect, as well as a wind warning with 70 km winds there. 2 degrees the high in St. John's. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
The Alberta government lowered its budget surplus forecast by $750 million US following the recent tax breaks and social benefits announcements. The surplus will total $12.3 billion in the current fiscal year that ends in March. That is down from the $13.2 billion estimated back in August. Officials say the smaller surplus reflects a $2.5 billion increase in expenses. That includes a $1.3 billion provision to cover inflation measures announced by Premier Smith earlier this week. Canada's job vacancy rate increased from 5.4% in August to 5.7% in September. Stats Canada says the number of job vacancies for the month rose to 994,800. That is up 3.8% from the previous month. The federal agency says the increase was largely due to seasonal variations, as job vacancies typically peak in September. It says job vacancies in the construction industry were up by 14% and up 12% in the accommodation and food services sectors. Ford is recalling more than 634,000 SUVs around the world because a cracked fuel injector could spill fuel or leak vapors onto a hot engine, causing a fire. The recall covers Bronco Sport and Escape SUVs from 2020 through 2023 model years with the 1.5-liter three-cylinder engines. Dealers will update the engine control software so it detects a cracked injector. They will also install a tube to drain fuel from the cylinder head away from the hot surfaces. The company that assembles Apple's iPhones has apologized for a pay dispute that set off employee protests at a factory where virus controls have slowed production. Workers complained that the terms of wages were changed from what was originally offered. They walked out over complaints about unsafe conditions, while the company blamed a technical error. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 61 points on the day to finish at 20,344. The Dow was up 95 points to 34,194. The S&P 500 was up 23 on the day to 4,027, and the Nasdaq was up 110 points to 11,285. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 2 cents to 77.96 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 8 cents to 7.23 US. Gold was up $5.56 on the day to $17.55.24 US an ounce, and silver was down a cent to $21.53 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.62 per bushel, barley's at $9.80, canola's at $18.62, and corn is at $11.63 per bushel. Live cattle were down 45 cents to $153.35. Feeder cattle January contract was down $2.43 to $179.25, and lean hogs were down 30 cents to $83.95. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 74.98 US. Recapping one of our top stories, a 5.6 magnitude earthquake left more than 270 people dead and hundreds more injured. Buildings crumbled and terrified residents ran for their lives on Indonesia's main island of Java as the quake hit on Wednesday. There are reports that many of the casualties were children. Wetlands are a very important part of our ecosystem. In fact, they're just as important and vital as organs are to our bodies. Kirby England is a local plant and wetlands expert. He also teaches environmental studies at Lethbridge College and will explain the importance of wetlands momentarily. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Come for a festive evening and begin the Christmas season with the Lethbridge Christian Men and Women's Choir's annual Christmas concert, taking place at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church on Friday, December 9th at 7:30 p.m. Hear your favorite Christmas carols and join in the celebration of the birth of Christ in song. A free will offering will be accepted. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help make sandwiches, sort incoming donations, assist with Foot Friday, and many other opportunities to serve, receive training, and to provide support for this important cause of bringing hope to the hopeless. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The city of Lethbridge has many wonderful parks and natural areas. One of the great features that so many of us appreciate about these natural areas are the ponds and the wetlands. And we wanted to take a deeper dive to learn more about the importance of these special places. So we asked Kirby England, who is a local plant and wetlands expert from Lethbridge College, to join us today. Kirby, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate it.
Okay, so in addition to being on the faculty at Lethbridge College, you teach environmental sciences, right? So part of your biography also says that you're a riparian analyst. So maybe explain to our viewers what that is and what you do.
Sure. So that's a little bit of an older title, but I'll run with it.
Sure.
A riparian area is basically that transition between an aquatic ecosystem and a terrestrial ecosystem. So in Lethbridge, we're home to, I think, North America's third largest river valley park, which is pretty impressive. And because we're home to such a large river valley park, we're home to a huge amount of riparian area. And so as a former career of mine was as a riparian analyst with a group called Cows and Fish, which is, of course, sort of founded in Lethbridge, and many Lethbians will know well, or Lethbridgeans, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
You'll know which one is correct. And so, yeah, I kind of went on from that. I'm still a riparian area and wetland ecologist here at Lethbridge College, and also for my own environmental consulting firm, which is called You Betcha Environmental.
Well, then you would be the perfect person to ask this question to. Why are the natural wetlands that we see in the community parks around us, why are they so important?
Yeah, well, we should step back ever so slightly there. Few of the wetlands in many of our community parks are actually natural. There are a few, certainly along the river valley, some that were sort of formed by more natural processes. But a lot of the wetlands that we do have in the city of Lethbridge are engineered wetlands or designed wetlands, which is fine. It's sort of a benefit of having irrigation in the district, as there's all of this extra water to go around. And those wetlands play really important roles with regards to that water. They do lots of water filtration, extra water storage, and then, of course, the part that we can appreciate when we go to those spots is the huge amount of biodiversity that we're going to see there. So all of the birds that take advantage of the wetland, fish in some of those systems like Nicholas Sharon and Riverstone Pond near where I am. And then, of course, all of the beavers and muskrats and everything else we sometimes see in our city of Lethbridge.
Yeah, definitely. So can you maybe compare those with the importance of wetlands in and around a farmer's field, for example?
Definitely. So in both cases, the sort of common expression is the wetlands are the kidneys of the ecosystem. They're doing all of this water filtration, removal of pollutants, removal of nitrogen and phosphorus, things that are pretty common around many a farmer's field. And so those wetlands are basically improving the water quality, they're improving the conditions for soil microbial activity for a variety of organisms. And so just as they're important to have within the city, they're really important to maintain out there on the land. And The numbers on this are, approximate, but I believe it's about 78% of all wetlands in the prairie pothole region, which of course we're part of, have been converted or otherwise removed. So it's really quite an imperiled ecosystem when 4 to 5 are already gone, and we're still continuing to convert those wetlands.
Well, everyone thinks that beavers are cool and, well, always
Yeah.
busy. They
Yeah.
can maybe sometimes cause problems for landowners.
Definitely.
Do we have beavers closer to Lethbridge? I believe I've seen at least a couple.
You certainly have.
Yeah.
So one of the things we just did this last fall as part of some work with the city of Lethbridge was a sort of active lodge survey. And the numbers may have changed slightly, and hopefully I'm okay releasing this data, but we had around 15 active lodges sort of entirely along the river within the city of Lethbridge. So, you put it at around 5 beavers on average in each of those lodges. And, we may have anywhere from, say, 60 at the low end to 80 at the high end, or 90 at the high end, but 75-ish beavers in and around our river valley. And many folks, of course, have seen them. And a real highlight in this city is the high level bridge, of course. And a real highlight for me as a beaver researcher was to find a beaver colony right up against one of the big cement buttresses of the high level bridge, and living basically right on the downstream side of that.
And did you find it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was the first. And certainly when you're telling folks you're looking for beavers in the city, they're always going to say, oh, I know this lodge, I know this lodge. And so, but we did confirm, as of mid-October at least, that beaver certainly had built a good food cache there, meaning they're going to try and overwinter in that spot. So those Lethbridge folks who want to get out and see beavers, head down to the Helen Schuler Nature Center, take your trail network out to the riverbank, and you'll see that big, impressive beaver lodge right on the back.
Sounds awesome. And speaking of Lethbridge folks that want to get out and about, do you have any favorite natural areas around the city that would make for a great weekend afternoon visit that you could recommend?
Definitely. So, I mean, that's one of them. Head on down to the Helen Schuler and get onto that, the River Walk and Coulee Walk, any of those. I mean, Coulee Walk, less of a beaver spot, obviously, but certainly a good one. If you want to get a little more of a, wild Lethbridge experience, we like 6 Mile Coulee in behind Lethbridge College here. There's some active beavers in there. At any point in time. I actually have some students out right now doing some willow staking and some habitat improvements with the Old Man Watershed Council down in 6 Mile. So definitely a good spot to check out. And then, even if you just want to sort of see a wetland and see some of this biodiversity, places like Helen Schuler, Nicholas Sharon are a good spot. Nice trails. You're going to get the full treatment there.
Wow. Okay, so switching gears from beavers to
Sure.
let's talk about cattle. So while doing some research for this interview, my producer found that there were studies done using cattle grazing and native plants to regenerate wetlands areas down actually in Nevada. So that group seemed to have a lot of success in bringing the wetlands back to that part of the state. So have you done any similar research on the benefits of grazing cattle around wetlands in southern Alberta?
Yeah, so not me personally to the extent, I mean, with that group, Cows and Fish, which is the full name, Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society, that whole thing was born out of exactly what you've said, that, sound stewardship of riparian areas and wetland areas by livestock producers can really have huge benefits both to cattle and to fish. And of course, fish thrive on aquatic ecosystems. And a healthy, intact riparian area is just going to improve the quality of that ecosystem. And so certainly we do have that work being done in Alberta, lots of research to that. In fact, Cows and Fish is just celebrating 30 years, sort of in operation this Friday with a bit of a gala. So it's certainly something that's been ongoing in our province for 3 decades now. I don't do as much in terms of direct benefits of grazing. It's not so much the, cattle going in there and chewing down vegetation per se that's going to improve your wetland or your riparian area, but it's following those principles of range management and sort of managing with ecosystem function in mind that will improve overall quality. And that's what they've shown down in Nevada and elsewhere. And then, of course, beavers are a natural benefit to wetlands and riparian areas as well. They sort of manage those. And so there's getting to be a good body of research showing that too, that when you couple, beavers with bringing back the water and then cattle and good, range operations, there's benefits for the fish, the water, for the wetland, for all the above.
Maybe so that viewers can understand it a little bit more and have more has a little bit more impact. Are there any success stories or wetland renewal projects happening in southern Alberta right now?
Yeah, lots. Sorry, putting me a bit on the spot with that.
Okay.
So one of the things, if you want to check out on actually the Cows and Fish webpage, is basically what they call demonstration sites. So there's been a number of ranchers in southern Alberta that have seen sort of the benefits of sound riparian management, and they've presented themselves as demonstration sites. So they've kind of led the way. And I could quickly look a couple up. I'm just Ellerts would be an example, and others. And then through the Old Man Watershed Council, one of the things they regularly do is host field tours and other things, and they get people out to see projects where they've done wetland and riparian area restoration, and basically showcase the success of those efforts there. So either of those organizations can sort of point you in the direction of lots of really well done riparian and wetland improvement and stewardship projects.
Now, Kirby, what important function do the wetland plants and animals do in the winter?
Well, I mean, basically survive until spring when they can do it again.
Just like all of us.
Yeah, just like all of us, exactly. Try not to die. And, there's still, of course, the biodiversity benefit to all those native species that don't migrate, that stay here over the winter. Plants, even when the above ground vegetation is mostly dead, still have that root mass that's holding that soil together. So preventing erosion, preventing, sedimentation into the channel, kind of catching things that would otherwise wash into those wetlands. So they're still playing that benefit. And then, the wildlife species are still a part of an ecological community. So prey for predators and likewise predators to help manage prey populations and nutrient cycling and all those sorts of steps that never stop.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk about another field that you specialize in, and that would be plants. So what made you want to research and study plants?
Well, eyesight mostly. So I was going to be a wildlife biologist, and I start working, on a grizzly bear project. Well, that was fine. I could see bears and do that work. But then we're out there looking at birds, and what's this brown thing that just flew by? And somebody goes, "Well, that's a so-and-so." I go, "I didn't get that. I can tell you it's a little brown bird." And that was just kind of the realization, like, oh, wildlife's really moving fast and you got to identify it. I like learning what things are. I like identifying them. I've always done lots of that. But with plants, you get time to sit there and look at it and really understand it. And of course, that's sort of a tongue-in-cheek answer. Really what it is for me and plants is they're just such a foundation of the habitat. And you wouldn't have the bird in the tree if you didn't have the tree. And you wouldn't, in our case, as we learned, have these big bears out on the landscape if there weren't foods, mostly plants, to sustain them through all the seasons. And so I just see plants, as many do, it's such a foundation to that functioning ecosystem. And although maybe not as charismatic as some of those, big mega carnivores and other things, the plants deserve our understanding and our respect. And I like to do what I can to help people better understand and appreciate plants.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. In the wild areas around Lethbridge, are there any issues with invasive plant species?
Oh, yeah, it's extremely abundant. So, all of Alberta that's subjected to agriculture and anywhere we've really had humans settle, you often bring plants with you from elsewhere. And initially, some things that seem maybe beneficial, like caragana and other species, they were Eastern European plants that allowed you to establish windrows and minimize soil erosion and other things. Over time, they just sort of grew unchecked, and now they've invaded and displaced a good number of native species. And so, yeah, we've got a good number of invasive plants of all life forms. Trees like Russian olive, shrubs like caragana. It's just a long list of weeds. Pennycress and many others, kind of some of the thistles, and then even grasses, downy brome, which gets called cheatgrass. It displaces native grass communities and cheats everybody on the rangeland, doesn't have much for forage value. And, in the United States and elsewhere and in Canada too, we've lost, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of acres and millions of dollars in lost revenue just by losing ground to some of these invasive species. So it's a major concern in this part of the world.
Okay, well then, Kirby, it looks like we are about out of time, but thanks so much for the conversation. Always great to open our eyes into a broader view of a world that we don't necessarily live in.
Yeah, no, you do live in it, definitely. And I'm always glad to share some of this information. And for anybody interested, of course, we're here at the college. We're happy. Lots of the plants and other things we've talked about are on display in some of our collections, which are open to the public. So definitely come check it out anytime. Always happy to do these sorts of interviews. Take care.
That was Kirby England, a professor and floral and wetlands expert from Lethbridge College.
Many parents today are really concerned about the influence society has on their kids. From the classroom to television to social media, our children are inundated with messages they're sometimes not equipped to handle or even comfortable with. How can we really help keep our kids safe and prepare them to walk in God's ways amidst all of this? Joining us now to talk about it is Bree Stensrud. Bree is the director of Women of Welcome and the co-author of the book, The Biggest Best Light, and she joins us now from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Bree, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me, Hal.
You bet. Now, first of all, tell us what really sparked you to write this book and discuss the timing of releasing it right now.
I think when you look around in our country, everybody has a story, and everybody wants to be seen, and yet we all are categorized in some way, and the culture just seeks to divide us in so many different ways. And so this was a book that was really important to get out about really shining God's light on other people who are made in the image of God.
So which age demographic of kids is the book really aimed at, and what are you hoping will really be the biggest takeaway from this book?
The book is really aimed at elementary age kids. It's a really core message about loving people as God would and seeing people as God would. And sometimes the way that we live our lives doesn't put us in close proximity to people that we should see and we should care about and that maybe are more vulnerable in our society. And so this is a book that hopefully helps our elementary age kids really dig into and start looking for and seeing people as God does and loving them as He would.
You know, I remember when my kids were younger, I mean, they're adults now, but when they were elementary school age, they were, quite influential as well. You could have a very strong influence on them, and then they tried to be an influence on their classmates at the same time. So let's talk about the importance of maybe planting the seeds with kids when they're really young.
Yeah, I mean, our kids at this age, in the elementary school age, they're like sponges. And even before that they can talk and verbalize, they're acting, they're mimicking all of the ways in which we do things. So as parents, it's really important not only that we put a lot of really good literature, like obviously the scriptures and other books that uplift those morals and values that we care very deeply about, but that we also live in these ways too, so that it's not something that just seems like a story, but it's something that's the story of your family. It's the way in which you guys live your lives, that you are looking out for people who might be needy. You are looking out for people who might be lost in different kinds of societal holes and cracks that everyone tends to fall through in really tough times.
Do you think some of the biblical stories still really resonate with the kids today, especially the story of David and Goliath, and of course of Jesus and his sacrifice and God's saving grace?
I mean, part of this book really talks about how all of our sin has created so many shadows in which we can't really see people as God sees them. And so it talks about really kind of stepping out into God's light and shining God's light into the world, and how sometimes that can be a scary thing when someone doesn't look like you or talk like you or think like you. But they're made in the image of God. And so again, as the world would seek to divide us, Christians are called to really preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bonds of peace. And so this book talks about how Jesus comes down and He's the one that helps us really shine that light through His Holy Spirit into the lives of others.
Amen. Now, Bree, let's talk about the message you want to try and get across to parents through your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it goes back to how do we model living God's light in this world to our kids? Are we
taking risks and steps towards people who aren't like us, that maybe don't really fit in our kind of curated lives that we tend to have as churchgoers. We can kind of get in a rhythm and a routine that's very comfortable for us. And Jesus was constantly seeking out those who had been forgotten or marginalized, and he shined a light on them, so much so that they ended up in the Bible. And those are the stories that we continue to tell our kids and we pass along. So I think it's really important for parents to not only read the scriptures in the home, but to model what that really looks like, to be looking out for the marginalized and to be seeing people as God does, beyond all of the different kind of labels that culture would really have us put on people.
It's funny, when I was a kid, my father used to say, son, do as I say, not as I do. But as
Right.
Christian parents, it's kind of the opposite. Do as I do. So you have to try and lead a perfect example for your kids.
And that's really hard to do, especially when you're in a routine and you've got, multiple kids going to multiple activities and all that. It's like, where do you make time to really get into some of these cracks and crevices of the culture where maybe people are really lost and forgotten and really hurting, that aren't really just in your normal sphere of life? And so it will take something, it will cost you something to engage with people who aren't in that close proximity to you. But there is power in proximity. When Jesus got close to people, that's when he changed their life. That's when his saving grace was brought right to them. And I think it was unavailable for so many people in the Bible. And then Jesus came down and said, it's available for everybody.
So Bree, how can moms and dads really use this book to help nurture and teach their children?
Yeah, I think this is one of the kind of core books that you can put in your library of reading at night that really explains what the image of God is. And right from Genesis 1:26 and 27, we care about vulnerable people. We are pro-life people because we care about each and every person who is made in the image and likeness of God. So this book really talks about image bearers, about what it means to be made in God's likeness and how that looks different and how that's to be appreciated over every category of people that you see. So I do think this is a great discussion tool to have that explains the Imago Dei and that also helps our kids see different people in a new light. And I think that that's very helpful for parents to have in the library of all of the theological stuff we're trying to, impart to our kids. This is a core theological book for an elementary age kid.
So how do you feel this book really helps us address issues such as equality and human dignity, the sanctity of life, sin, and true, meaningful purpose with our children?
This book really does kind of cover illustratively, being pro-life, being whole life from womb to tomb. And so our kids, there's illustrations in here. And I don't think I've ever seen a book like this that has illustrations of depicting a child in the womb. We have illustrations of, okay, so you might not see a child in the womb from the outside, but there is a human being flourishing inside of a woman. And so there are just different depictions through the illustrations that show you where people might be hidden and maybe feel unseen, but what it looks like to engage with those people and what it looks like to trust God to engage you in those certain places that might feel a little tricky, might feel a little bit scary, but this book, because of the illustrator and the illustrations that have been done, are really taking you through the whole gamut and the whole life pro-life ethic and looking at people as image bearers, even though they look so different from everybody else.
So what are some of the simple, practical ways we can teach our children to be image bearers of God to those around them so they can be a good influence?
Yeah, I think what people are looking for is just like you said, do as I say, not as I do. Nowadays, people really want to see people doing what they say that they believe, that they prioritize what they say that they value. And I think what that means is sometimes some of our families are going to really have to take a hard look at, are we facing the vulnerable? Are we creating time? Are we creating space to be inconvenienced? I mean, we only really love as well as our willingness to be inconvenienced. So is your family ever inconvenienced for the sake of others? And if so, I think that looks like the heart of Christ. I think that looks like Jesus's life, being inconvenienced to love on and appreciate other people that might not just be in your normal circle of life.
Now, as parents, most of us really don't feel qualified to teach our children about theology, but your book, however, lays out God's plan quite clearly. How does the book really help parents share their own spiritual journey and story with their children?
Well, it's really great because at the very beginning of the book, we just talk about, this is what God intended. And God created the world in this great, big, wonderful light. And then it was our sin that brought in all of these kind of sinful shadows that hurt and harmed people and made them feel unseen. And sometimes those shadows, hiding people in shadows, made other people more powerful, and people fed off of that power. And it does have questions in the back of the book that parents can ask with their kids, like, who do you think feels unseen in our family? Who do you think feels unseen in our community? What is the way you think maybe we could do a better job of seeing people or loving on people? So there are some discussion questions, there's scripture in here. And so I do think it's a conversational tool that parents can use to say, you know what, I remember this. And there's going to be some illustrations that some kids that are younger are not going to understand, maybe. They're going to be like, and it's meant to prompt questions and to have deep discussion with your kids. So we meant that on purpose.
Do you have any tips on how a family can maybe weave the concepts of the book into their prayer or devotional life?
Yeah, I think as we sit down with our kids and we think through who's hurting in this country and who's angry in this country, usually we can tend to think like, oh, we want to pray for our enemies, we want to pray for people we don't like, or we only want to pray for people we do like. I do think this is an opportunity for us to ask God to help us see people better and to engage with people better. So if anything from like a mean kid at school, seeing that kid, being curious about why that child is hurting you because maybe he's hurt, and what that looks like to shine light on maybe someone in your own family that feels forgotten, and engage with that conversation and with that person better. So I do think that this will bring up a lot of really good, healthy conversations that you guys as a family will begin to have some ideas about how you might be able to enter into different spaces better, even in your own life.
So let's say you sit down with your son or daughter, elementary school aged, and they're being bullied at school. And your child wants to shine the light and be an example of God's love. But at the same time, they don't want to put up with a lot of the bullying in school. What do you say to that child in a loving, comforting way, but at the same time, that child wants to stand up for themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we just had this issue with my own daughter who's in 4th grade. And one of the things, she came home for weeks just crying about a girl that was bullying her at school. And we sat down every night, and it gave us, God uses those opportunities for us to pray for that other little girl. But also I just kept reminding her, you know what? We have to stay curious about her, because nobody just hurts someone for no reason. It's usually hurt people. So what do we do? We don't take abuse, but what do we do to stay curious, like keep our heart open to try and understand maybe what it is? And what ended up happening was 4 weeks later of us crying and praying together every night just to stay curious and to stay open, found out that little girl, her family's going through a divorce. Wow. And so, and her father is abusive at home. Wow. And so it just gave us a little, staying curious helped us be empathetic towards her. And so we didn't retaliate. We just decided to pray. And we kind of made some people aware just to kind of be on the lookout. But then when we found that out, they are now really good friends. It only took staying curious and just entering in and just saying, I'm so sorry. I don't know why you're hurtful to me. It sounds like you might be hurt, and I'm here if you need me. And, and we just walk through that. And I think staying curious and then just also trying to be for people. Like there's something obviously going on with that other person. And so to think, okay, Jesus cares just about as much about them as he does about my daughter and how much that person's hurting. Same with my daughter. And to be open for God to really show you how to have a deep level of compassion and empathy for someone else that might be hurtful to you.
Yeah, instead of fighting fire with fire, you fight fire with love and make a real difference in that other person's life. And then they'll take notice, like, you're different, you're special. Let's talk, You didn't lash out at me like the way I lashed out at you, so that can open somebody's eyes and their heart. Now, with all of the stark differences in today's divided world, Bree, what advice do you have for us to be able to see others as image bearers?
Mm-hmm. I think this can be really difficult, and it's not natural for us to do, unfortunately. But I do think it goes back to staying curious about people. In my line of work that I do advocacy work. And a lot of the times, a lot of the questions, a lot of the comments that come to my way are really divisive, and they're very, hot rhetoric. And when I respond with calmness and with peace and with sincerity, people are very shocked at that. And I think that Christians have a really big opportunity in this really divided and heated culture to show up in a different way and to stay curious when other people have already made decisions and labeled. I think labels are lazy. So it's like if you want to really show up as we believe Christ would, why don't we show up with curiosity instead of condemnation? Why don't we show up with empathy instead of judgment? And I think that that's going to be a way forward. And I think that it's a discipline. It's not something natural. And I think as we find empathy for people, then we start to realize this is someone who's just like me. It was pain that was coming out. So I do think that if we stay curious, we'll be able to have good conversations that allow us to really connect with other people and see them as image bearers.
And if you have a cool hat like yours, that's also a good conversation starter too, right?
I guess so.
Now, any final thoughts on how we as parents can best equip our kids to be safe and be light bearers out in maybe a dark world?
Yeah. And, it's so interesting because I think that is really what American culture kind of looks for, is to provide safety and to provide kind of this screening of anything negative that's going to come into our way. And I think that Jesus lived in a completely opposite direction, in which he said, I'm going to walk through Samaria. I know you guys usually take a 2-day external route around Samaria, but I'm going to go through Samaria and we're going to meet some people that you guys would never talk to. And it's probably going to offend your sensibilities, but I'm going to actually tell her that I'm the Messiah before I tell anybody else, this woman at the well. And so I think that sometimes the ways that we engage people are not going to feel super safe to us, but I think that Jesus is always going to be with us. And if it comes to showing compassion and love to an image bearer, Matthew 25 is really clear about entering into all those spaces where people are hungry, where they're in prison, where they're in need, where they're sojourning, where they have no clothing. Like, some of these places that you find people and engage with those people are not necessarily like the safest places of town or the safest conversations to be in, but those are the conversations that I think that we're made for, because Jesus had those conversations and he told us to go and do likewise. So I think that we have to take some steps forward and do some light shining as parents ourselves.
Bree Stensrud is the director of Women of Welcome and co-author of the book, The Biggest Best Light. Thanks for joining us today from Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.